Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I think, yes. That's my slides. So thank you very much. And David, thank you very much for the invitation to be here, to join your team, to be a part of the celebration here of Consejo C and your 5 years. LinkedIn is good for something. That's how David and I met. So if you're going into a professional career, it might be worth having an account on there. But let me tell you a little bit about the work that we have done. And I'm blessed to have had, I think I'm close to 48 years now in cybersecurity, long before we used the word cybersecurity. I started working for the federal government 1977 at the National Security Agency. And I've spent my lifetime either performing, leading, or studying attacks. How do systems break? How can they be manipulated? How do attackers take advantage of us? And if I could divide my career up into 3 pieces. The first piece was learning the technical craft of breaking systems, either through the mathematics. Cryptography was the primary science of the day. I knew so little about this when I started, after I got my bachelor's degree. When the recruiter called me, they had to spell cryptography for me because I had no idea what it was. But I spent my early years looking at the mathematics of US cryptographic algorithms, randomization, and key management. So I learned the craft, shifted to computer science, and that's what led me on what we now call cybersecurity. The second third of my career, I moved into management jobs and still working as a technical analyst, but running organizations. And what that gave me the opportunity to see was attacks at very large scale. Because if you were in the 70s and then 80s involved in this business, the National Security Agency was the place to be. An incredible body of knowledge, amazing workforce, great work to do, lots of exciting things happening and changing rapidly. So managing organizations, you get a different perspective and you get to see different kinds of work. And I moved up from kind of the mathematical analysis into things like operational testing. So what we call penetration testing today, red teams, 0 days, that's my professional life. So I got to see a lot of work, a lot of results when we tested US systems that most people did not get to see. In those days, if we found a flaw in a government system, it was treated as so secret no one should know about it, including the people who had to fix it. It was kind of crazy, but today you live in a world where information about flaws is everywhere. But as I came up, that information was very scarce. And so I got to see a lot of what was going on. I ran the groups that were in my management control included the NSA Red Team, the Blue Teams, the crypto analysts, the people who hunt for bugs and implants and cameras in the walls. So when nations fight against each other, there are no rules. They will attack you through every means possible, technical, through people, etc. So I learned the craft. I got to manage, which gave me a lot of insight into what was going on. And I spent the last third of my career still managing those organizations, but trying to figure out what is going wrong. Why do we find the same problems over and over and over again? Why do we keep finding missing patches and bad management and poor configurations of security? Something was missing. So the model I grew up in, right, learning about attacks, we did not know how to translate into action at very large scale. And there was an implicit or hidden model there. The idea was if you could pay some smart young person, I'm sure there's plenty of you out there, to find the flaws, to do the penetration test, and tell the person what you found, they would either be so inspired or so scared they would go fix it. Well, let me just tell you, that has never happened at any large scale in my entire career. Because fixing problems is a really different challenge than finding problems. When you're fixing problems, you worry about incentives and money and policy and people and buying tools. There are a lot of things to worry about as you try to fix problems. So that really led me on a different journey for the last third of my government career, to think about how do we translate knowledge that we have about flaws in systems, about the actions of attackers, into specific action to help individuals, but also to scale it across the entire nation, across the ecosystem that we all are connected to. So that's kind of the theme. Next slide, please. I'm going to try that. Oh, I do. Oh, thank you. You can tell I've mastered the technology here, haven't I? So the term I came up for this was what hit me later in my career. And again, I've been doing this a long time. And I realized at some point, as a lifelong defender, never in our history have we had so much insight into attackers. Never have we had so many tools, so much training, so much ability to pull together organizations, so much government concern about the economic losses. And yet we weren't getting better. Now, we were technically getting better, but guess who gets better even faster than the good guys? The attackers. I often say, if you want to study capitalism, don't study the good guys, study the bad guys. The criminal enterprise is much more efficient because they have a single objective, or typically, to steal your resources, to deny you service. They have the advantages, and they act like capitalists. Many of them now, they don't do reconnaissance, they buy reconnaissance. They don't build botnets, they rent time on botnets. They don't build their own tools. That doesn't make sense. They purchase them, they buy toolkits. So the criminal enterprise naturally breaks up into specialization, and if you can't provide service cheap enough, you won't survive. So capitalism is really the model that the bad guys have. Meanwhile, on defense, everyone seems to be struggling to defend their own network, but there's no enterprise defense. We think that everyone will be inspired by a penetration test, and they will go on and magically somehow fix the problem. And again, my experience was that never happened. So we had all these new resources, training, tools, testing, information about attackers. They're just startling to someone who started in the 1970s. We had none of that. And yet we're not getting better fast enough. What's the problem? And the name of the problem, I called it the fog of more. If you've ever studied military strategy, there's a book, Clausewitz's Fog of War. Does that ring a bell with anyone? It's a military strategy of thinking that in high conflict situations, decision-making is so confusing. Right? You have a battle plan when you go to war, which immediately disappears on the first moment after the first shot, because there's so much noise, so much confusion. The problem we have in cybersecurity is the fog of more. Too many choices. Having all those resources doesn't help. It actually paralyzes people because they don't know what to do. There's too many choices for training, for tools. And any system owner knows they are overwhelmed by marketing claims and uncertainty about what they're supposed to do, and a different auditor has a different opinion, and the boss wants this, and the technical people want that. It's overwhelming because of confusion and too much to choose from, which tells me defense is always about prioritization. It's not the lack of resources, it's too many that confuse most of the enterprise. And so that has helped me. This is a talk I gave in 2012 or 13 at the biggest trade show in the industry. And I get more comments about this talk than anything I've ever done. In other words, it changed people's perspective to think about prioritization. And when you prioritize, then you have to figure out, who can I trust? Do I trust the government? Do I trust my vendor? Do I trust my policymaker, my business owner? That becomes a challenge. So in my second career, along with my friend Kurt, we have tried to tackle some of these problems as a nonprofit. But remember, we have lots of information nowadays about attacks. The challenge is about translating to action. So let me give you some examples of what we're doing. First of all, in my second career, we've been doing this as a nonprofit. So we're one of the leading, I think it's safe to say, leading cyber nonprofits in the industry. We're about to celebrate our 25th birthday. And David can't wait to celebrate the 25th birthday of his nonprofit. But we started with a simple idea that in cyberspace, we all have more in common than we do that is different. But we don't always behave like it. The company started because of this. I ran a group at NSA. We produced, we had an incredible workforce, very bright people, lots of insight into attacks and what attackers were doing. So we could take all that information and translate it into what are the specific things the Defense Department should do at every desktop, every server, every perimeter device to protect itself. And we internally produced that, and it was very well known across the government. But private sector friends looked at that and they said, well, what about us? We don't have that many people. We don't have insight into all these attackers. We don't know how to translate into the action. So a businessman and a number of his friends, a few government friends, got together in August of year 2000 with this big idea. None of us has enough talent or insight to figure this out on our own like a giant government agency like NSA. But if we put our people together, if we built a collective of people across the industry, we would have tremendous information. We could do the equivalent work, and then we could give it away to the industry so that everyone could benefit from those smart folks without having to have that kind of investment that they couldn't make anyway. That was the general idea of what led to the Center for Internet Security. This collective action, right? And it wasn't about talking about the problem. It was about creating guidance that could be shared, implemented, put into tools, measured against, and so forth. So that was the big idea that started the center. We matured from literally, I met the Center for Internet Security employee number 1 when there was exactly 1 employee. And it started with this very simple idea. Today we're around 500 people with an incredibly powerful business model that most nonprofits do not have. We make enough money to sustain our work and then some, which allows us to grow and reach out to partners. So just a couple of things. That kind of work that I described is in the upper right, security best practices. And there's a notion there. And again, many of you are, especially students, are studying some technical field. As you come into cybersecurity, you need to hold cybersecurity professionals, myself included, your professors included, to the same standards we would hold to any other science. Do not let them use undefined terms. So when someone says best practices, you need to challenge them, including me. And at CIS, we have a definition. We'll explain it to you. We're transparent about it. But people throw terms around in cybersecurity like attack and vulnerability and flaw, best practice, guidance. They throw them around without any rigor. My favorite is cyber hygiene. Do you know that term? We should all basically wash our hands. People say that, but no one defines it. They give you an example. We should patch better. That's good hygiene. But examples are not enough to drive change. If you want to drive change, you have to specify a number of things that can be shared, measured, and reported so that people know when they're making progress. So in this industry, we've let ourselves slide in a lot of areas. Right? We've used sloppy terminology when, if we want to be more rigorous, more like safety and other engineering-based fields, we need to bring more rigor to the way we talk about things, or we'll just be talking forevermore. So best practices. We have a business organization, we sell things, right? So the model is still the same. Use volunteers, create products, give them away. Give them away, download them freely. But how do we support a company? Well, we have a membership model. If you want more from us, if you want tools, if you want some support, you can become a member, and it's pretty reasonably priced. And that gives you access to our people, the tools that we create. I'll give some examples in a bit. But it allows us then, and then we license some of our content to some of the biggest tool vendors in the security business. So between a membership and licensing, we create enough income to allow us to pay people. And again, if you work for volunteers, you think, well, it's all free, right? Well, I often say, if you want the most value from free labor, you need to organize it professionally. And that's what we do. We provide the strategy, the roadmap, the planning, find the volunteers, organize them around projects. We work with the vendor community, with standards communities, publish, support the documents over time, right? So it brings professionalism to all this technology and goodwill that's out there. And how many of you are headed for a cyber career or want to? Oh, please tell me some of you care, but I see one. Thank you. We need you. We need your help. But it's a great field to go into if you get the opportunity. Because one of the great joys of my career, and Kurt would say the same, to work on work that is important to the world. This work matters. It's inherent in every nation, everything, our lives as economic animals, as social creatures. This is really important work. It's full of great technical problems, and it's filled with amazing people of great talent and goodwill who want to work together. So sometimes I think all we do is we provide an excuse for people to work together. So if you have a chance to be in this field, let me just tell you, there couldn't be a better path from my point of view. So end of commercial, please join us. So we have a regular organization, we provide some services, and we're the only nonprofit that has, in addition to this advice-giving model, we have a major nationwide across the US, 20,000 member operational model. I won't bore you with the legal details, but we are the multi-state information sharing and analysis center. And we are funded by the government to do this. This is a government-funded part of what we do. We provide essentially the central watch, cyber watch and sharing for 20,000 state local governments. So incidents that are reported, helping them recover, putting out advisories, bulletins, helping them recover from breaches and security incidents, hosting events for sharing, publications, and all that. What that gives us is what we had at NSA. Around the clock, we are watching attacks happen. And the advice we give them is the same advice we give away through the website at no charge to you. All right, so being able to combine this, what is happening in real life at very large scale with what is the best thing to do about it, that's really a unique perspective. We're not the only people that understand this, but to do it at scale, to have them in the same organization is just extraordinarily powerful. So it's one of the things that separates us from a lot of the industry. So a couple of things I'll mention quickly. The company was founded on this idea of configuring individual pieces of information technology. What's the best way to secure a Windows desktop, a mail server, a web server, a perimeter device? That's the problem that CIS was set up to solve through volunteer labor. We've gone from one employee, we call that a benchmark. One employee, one benchmark, two benchmarks, three. We are undoubtedly the world's largest producer, independent producer, the world's largest producer, period, of this kind of information. And again, it's given away for free. We cover, 100 plus technologies across multiple product families. We're embedded in lots of policies and requirements that are out there. Right? So we take the idea and we work with folks who are going to use it. And one way you can change the incentive, why would an enterprise owner spend money to do these things? Well, because PCI is the way that all credit card information is secured, right? You have to meet a certain set of standards. PCI calls out our benchmarks as one of the requirements in their system. So you have to be able to match the right technical answer with the right incentive, the policy answer, the thing that will get you better insurance rates or help you deal with a lawsuit and liability or deal with a regulator. And that's another area that, again, because many of us in our leadership team are ex-government, we have thought a lot about how do we pull all this together. In my experience, right, many of you are have technical backgrounds. We always want the answer to be the best technical answer. In my experience, that never happens by itself. By the time you get to public policy and insurance and regulation, the best technical answer just doesn't appear because most of the people that are responsible for that are not technical people. They don't understand the technical issues. So what happens in law or regulation is some compromise between technology and the political process and good intentions. So you have to actively work to make the best technical answer the action that people finally take. So the benchmarks, the foundation of the company, again, you can go to our website, download these freely. You can be in touch with the authors if you want. Much of the labor is volunteer labor organized by team leaders that typically work for us. The CIS controls, this was mentioned. So the benchmarks are at the component level, a Windows desktop, a mail server, a web server. If you move up one level of abstraction, how do I run this stuff? How do I organize it? Where do I put things? That's where the CIS controls are. And this started as a a project one afternoon when I was still at the National Security Agency. And I gathered a handful of people because I was making the observation I shared with you, right? We're finding problems, we're telling people, and they're not getting fixed. What's going on here? There was too much guidance, too much advice, too much to understand. So I called that group of people in here. I said, no one will leave the room until we all agree on a small number of things that we think everyone should do. And do not, in this meeting, try to solve world hunger, if you know that term, right? Security people are, including me, we are naturally conservative. We don't want to give you 5 things to do. We want to give you 50 things to do or 500 things to do because we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to make a mistake and leave something out. But if we tell you 500 things, you are immediately paralyzed. You don't know what to do. So I told the group, small number of things, and to me small meant 5 to 7, that we think everyone should do so we can get them to focus their attention and not get distracted by all this fog. Well, people being what they were, we couldn't agree. We came out with 10. So a simple list of 10 things went out in a 2-page letter. I would love to tell you that I'm really smart and had a big picture where it would go. It's not true. I sent the letter out to several friends in the government, and it came back to us from the SANS Institute, which is the biggest teacher of cybersecurity in the world. And they wound up turning it into a community service project worldwide. I thought it was a 2-page letter. I would never see it again. But they turned it into an idea, and the idea was help everybody focus on the most important things to do. And that remains as one of our bedrock principles at CIS. Again, there's 1,000 things that you could do to defend yourself, but it doesn't make sense. You're never going to do 1,000 things. You can't afford it. What you want to do is focus your attention on things that really matter, things that would cause the most harm, things that the attackers are doing most frequently. I'll show you a bit how we focus that in just a minute. And then the benchmarks, remember, component by component, Windows Desktop. Once everyone started to move to the cloud, or the cloud became a major IT infrastructure, we took the benchmarks and worked with the major cloud providers so that you no longer have to come to us for a benchmark and download it and implement it. You can go to Amazon Web Services and say, I want 1,000 desktops, but I want them configured the way CIS says. And that turns out to be great for everybody. It's less work, fewer mistakes, easier to keep updated, and so forth. So it's been a tremendous growth area for us over the last few years. But it's another example of, it's not good enough to give people the right answer. We work with the vendors so it gets delivered to you naturally at very reasonable and rational prices. So let me talk then briefly about kind of the theme of the day. So here's one of the unspoken secrets of this industry. It's kind of a shame. These giant control catalogs, if you're familiar with what comes out of NIST, ISO 27000 series, PCI, where do those recommendations come from? Almost certainly, it happens because physically or virtually, a bunch of experts get in a room and they argue with each other until they're sick of talking, and they write it down. And that becomes these catalogs, these giant lists of controls. Right, and these are good people, smart people, lots of experience. They're trying to bring good judgment, right, and their experience to a form that you can use. The problem is when you have kind of an uncontrolled process, then you get a lot of, it may be a surprise to you, but technology, IT, information technology and security draws really smart people, but also people who tend to be highly opinionated and love to argue about these kinds of things. So you get kind of a human product, but if you picked a different set of 10 humans, you might get a different product. And again, did you pick a good set that has the right breadth of experience to cover 80, 90% of the cases? I don't know. So we did it, originally we improved our products by broadening the pool of people that were involved to make sure that we've covered every aspect of the ecosystem. But my background's in mathematics. So I have a dream, some of you may share this dream, that someday in this business we'll make most of our decisions based on data. We're still a long ways from it. So we have been engaged in a multi-year campaign to bring more data, more repeatability, more structure underneath our recommendations. So left to right, if you'll bear with me. The original list that I talked about the controls, it literally was 5 geeks in a room, if you know the term geek. Right? Really smart people that attacked, that defended, that knew technology, that studied intelligence. And we just argued. There was 5 of us in a room. Well, Sands took the idea and broadened it to thousands of geeks on a mailing list, right? Email flood of suggestions and ideas, and they, would have one of their instructors kind of sort it out. Then we started several years ago, probably in 2013 or so. We were seeing the emergence of threat summaries from the vendor community. Does anyone know the term Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report? So if you read one thing in the industry in any given year, I highly recommend the Verizon report. We are a data contributor, right? That dealing with state and locals. We anonymize our data, summarize it, provide it to Verizon. They have top-notch data scientists, the kind of people you wish you could hire, who do analysis, summary, trending, root cause, etc. So actually, we just did the 11th year with Verizon. I approached them with this idea. So they would do an amazing job of collecting data, doing analysis. But they didn't want to leave the reader hanging. So at the end, you would see a closing section. Here's what you can do about it. And guess what they would come up with? 5 or 10 things, all good things to do, but not very, based on what we saw, we recommend these things. What we did starting 11 years ago was I would work with them before they publish and map their summary, what they saw, into the critical controls. That is, if this is a problem highlighted by Verizon, which of these controls should you implement to help you deal with that problem? So that's why the fancier language is, I called it mapping to authoritative problem summaries. That is, people rightfully believe that Verizon is giving a pretty good mass market view of what is the real problem that's out there. But rather than leaving them hanging, Verizon's strength, by the way, is in attack analysis. It's not in solving the problems. They're really good at what they do, but they don't have people that run IT farms. They don't have people that deal with the operational problems. So we could bring that to them. So it was a perfect partnership. Since that time, we now do this with probably close to a dozen of these threat intelligence vendors. Right? So we bring expertise together to read these reports that you wish you had time to read, that you wish you had the expertise on staff. We do that for you, and then again, try to translate it into action. So as we start, we're continuing to move along left to right. Many folks in the industry have done things like that. Well, if CIS recommends set up my Windows desktop this way, let me put together a virtual network and a honeypot and let the attackers go at it and see which ones break. We've done that kind of stuff. We've set up, we did this at NSA and since set up large virtualization environments with lots of machines configured to different setups to see how they fare against attacks. And again, as we move left to right, we're bringing more formality, the use of data, rigor, and repeatability to this idea. Now, we haven't hit the right side yet, but we're getting there. And kind of where we are is loosely that mapping to and from a standard language, patterns, templates, etc. So let me give you a quick look. I won't bore you with the technical details, but it gives you a sense of here's what we're trying to do. And as far as I can tell, we're the only advice givers, recommendation givers that have anything like this. And we believe very strongly in it because our goal is to, for every recommendation, we want to be able to tell you this is the security value of this recommendation against this step of this class of attacks that you care about. If we could do that, then we're much closer to where we want to be. Then you could decide which classes of attack do I care about. And, these are my 3 options for defense. Which has the best cost benefit for me? Which do I already have in my environment? Which takes the fewest human beings to operate? You could then do the kind of analysis that you would need to do. Oops. So loosely speaking, this is our workflow. Again, I won't go through the details, but the idea is understanding attacks, doing lots of analysis to make sense of these attacks. And with all respect, people, and I know David says this too, but I know where he's coming from. People often say, what we need to do in cybersecurity is share. We need to share everything, incidents and threats and all that stuff. It's important. Please don't think I'm a bad person. but I used to give a talk in the DC area. Threat sharing is overrated. Right? We're already sharing so much information that people can't make sense of it. The verb that matters is not so much sharing. The verb that's really important is translate. How do I translate millions of data points of badness into a small number of constructive, specific, positive things that people can do about it? That's why you would read a Verizon report, unless you're in the threat business, right? You're looking for the data to translate. And again, it is our belief, why would everyone have to do that by themselves? Most people don't have the team that can read those reports. And they don't have to. We can do it as a group, right? We can bring together volunteers to translate all this knowledge into positive, constructive things. So that's kind of the conceptual model of our workflow here. And here's just a peek under the hood, because you'll go crazy if you try to understand all this. But this is the model of where we are now. In the upper right, I mentioned industry attack summaries. So on behalf of the community, we've probably, I guess maybe 10 or so of the leading threat intelligence vendors. So you could, Verizon, CrowdStrike, Palo Alto, IBM, I can't remember them all now, but almost all of them now produce some kind of annual report. They're all very cooperative around this kind of work. From them, what are we trying to do? We try to identify the 5 classes of attack that everyone needs to worry about, whether you know it or not. So things at the level of ransomware, things like that, right? The big categories of attack. We go across those, try to find consensus. What are the most important classes of attack? If you look at classes of attack, because people say, oh my gosh, the attacker is changing every day. Well, technically yes, but technically no. The classes of attack almost never change, have been relatively stable for years. So we look at classes of attack, we identify them from the data. We have a model. So if you're familiar with a thing called the MITRE ATT&CK framework, it is a very techie, geeky thing. Think of it as a formal way to identify all the, we'll call them atomic elements of attack. The pieces of code and information and data that are needed to execute attack. MITRE leads a nonprofit activity to formalize that language, MITRE ATT&CK. We look at the 5 classes, use MITRE ATT&CK as a repeatable, formal way to describe those 5 classes of attack. And then we look at all of the translation part. We look at every recommendation that we make, whether it's a benchmark or a control, and we attempt to identify of those 5 classes of attack and their formal expression, right, writing them out in MITRE ATT&CK's language. What specific value do you get from this registry setting, this recommendation, this action against one of those classes of attack? And it is incredibly tedious. Most people will not do this because it takes a lot of manual labor, at least right now. AI might save us, but it's a really, but it's worth doing. And it starts to provide us with a basis for being able to say something specific, right? Again, our goal is, what is the security value of everything we recommend? And we want to make that clear, transparent, given away to the community. So a couple other things about, so this is kind of the conceptual model. If you like gory details, I won't go through them, but just take my word for it. We start with the control, this is what's called a control flow map or something, I forget. This is the way I document this kind of stuff, but on the bottom and work your way up. The attack summary from DBIR, we identify the attack steps or types, which are described in patterns is an intermediate step, which are made up of what are called attack techniques, right? So this is, we work our way up from the bottom, starting from attacks. We work our way down from the top with our model of, we doing this, we already had benchmarks and safeguards, so we didn't start from scratch. We went back to look at the things we had said, because if we say things that we can't describe the security value, then we question ourselves. Again, security is full of good things to do. You could do this just in case maybe someday, to be conservative, you should do this. The problem is, again, that paralyzes people. It has expense for uncertain value. So we question ourselves, right? We don't want to give you lots. If you want lots of good things to do, you can go to lots of other places and get that. We're trying to bring you the smallest set of things that we know how to establish. So that's how, so these kind of meet in the middle. So working from data, we have a model. This is all documented and on our website. You're welcome to download it. We've gotten lots of feedback, and Kurt's about to lead a project to version 3 of this, right, in the next year. Then, again, that leads us to be able to say things like this. And these are the attack types down the left. For malware, if you use in the upper right, if you applied all of the safeguards in the CIS critical security controls, you get specific value against 94%, okay, of the techniques that are used in that class of attack. I don't think anyone else in the industry can say this, not at any scale and repeatedly. Right? So this is imperfect. If you're a math modeler or you've worked in these areas, you know there's some flaws or some leaps here that need some work. But it's closer than anything else that we have found. And so I wanted to share this with you, not because you want to memorize it, but to get a sense for how do we need to challenge ourselves as an industry to be more specific, more rigorous, and more transparent about the things that we ask people to do, right? We ask you to do with your enterprise. Okay, so the meaning of all this, beyond all the geeky stuff, the paper is there if you like to read this thing. Most people will not read it. Our feelings are not hurt. This is for the real practitioner. But this idea of establishing security value, and our goal is always to share with you why we recommend things. Once you have a basis for this, then you can start to think about other kinds of analysis. Because if you're a system owner, you're thinking things like, what's the smallest set of things I have to do to deal with malware? And how could I prove it to somebody else? Or you're looking to say, I already have a bunch of IT and I'm not going to throw it away. What's the next step beyond what I already own to give me the most security value? How is my next security dollar best spent? You start to think about these. This is where you want system owners thinking. Optimization, cost management, looking at alternatives, right? I could do it this way, more manpower but less cost, or this way, more cost, less manpower. So the idea is we're trying to get to where this kind of thing is supported so that you can do this sort of analysis. And we've worked with academics and others to try and look at this modeling problem here. And then the idea was we make this whole process transparent, it's documented, because there are communities. So think of the Verizon report as the best available mass market, right? They have 75 or something data contributors, including us. So it gives you a really good view of the entire ecosystem. But your situation may be different. Maybe you have extra data or more refined data or more specific data about your sector in this country. Maybe you have classified data that you cannot share, or proprietary that you cannot share outside your community. You can take our model and use your data. You could use our model and our data to say this is kind of the baseline, but our experience has been, if you have more refined data, you don't come up with different attacks and different attack types. You prioritize differently. You will think differently about which ones you do first based upon what is happening in your sector or your part of the economy. So the idea, again, is create the infrastructure so that people can do much more refined analysis about this. And then a couple of words about the future of all this business. And the term I call it the multi-framework era. So if you're a system owner, and we have done surveys on this, compliance, auditing, and PCI, all these other things, the typical system owner doesn't have to deal with just one of these. They have to deal with 2, 3, 5, 7 of these, depending on, are you handling credit cards, medical data, do you have European operations where you have to worry about privacy issues of a different type than in the United States? People are being overwhelmed by multiple security frameworks in their world, all at the same time. And almost everyone who creates a security framework assumes that they're the only one on earth. So you'll see they'll use different definitions, different process, different reporting requirements. And many a system owner has told me, we spent all this work to get ready for this auditor. For the same data, we have to rewrite it all because their language of auditing is different. And this regulator has a different language. It's all wasted work, right? And the goal, we talked about at dinner, the goal is that good IT security management produces as a byproduct the data that you can reuse to prove to others that you've done the right thing. That's the goal. So all this has really become a big part of the world that we're in. Again, I think we're the only security framework manufacturer or creator or advice giver. We have committed to cross-map everything we do to everything we can find. So if you want to know, hey, Tony, if we follow the CIS controls, how does that relate to NIST CSF? You can download the mapping from our website. PCI, ISO 27000, dozens. I think there's something like a couple dozen here. And by the way, it's my son that does 80% of them, so I know they're getting done. And we do that because if we don't do it, you have to do it. Right? So you want to be able to say, technically, here's what we did. And our work is closer to the IT view of things, right? It's closer to a technical roadmap. But your boss, he speaks NIST CSF or cares about PCI auditing. So you've got to reframe, we did this in CIS, but that matches to this requirement in PCI. That's the kind of world that we're in. It's not perfect, but we try to make the point. The goal is to make this easier for you that have to live in this multi-framework world. Benchmarks on the left, you can see, we are referenced in benchmarks. Kurt has talked about this at length in many of the formal frameworks now. And on the right, these are just examples of those mappings I talked about. And you can see, basically, if someone asks us, do you have a mapping from here to there, we do our best to provide it. And we have a backlog, I think, of them that we're working on now. We work very closely with folks like the Cloud Security Alliance. So the goal is to make this problem easier. We will create the mapping, and if the other end will cooperate with us, we'll do that up front so that we both agree this is the right mapping. The best example we have is Cloud Security Alliance. So right up front, rather than map after the fact, we invited Cloud Security Alliance to provide one of their volunteers to be part of our controls team. So that we develop cross-mapping right up front. We both publish it, we agree it's authoritative, there's no question. Sometimes, to be honest, the other end is not interested in cooperating. Like they have a proprietary methodology or whatever. We do our best. We will read every document that they publish, map what we say to what they say, and we'll provide that to you. The mapping is, again, available at no charge. It just becomes part of the service that we provide. So it's a really complicated area, but it affects many of the companies that we deal with, and it's just tremendously wasted work. The other thing I'll just mention here that's been very popular for us. So even though we are a fraction of the size in terms of recommendations, a fraction of the size of the NIST work, et cetera, people still are overwhelmed. They can be overwhelmed, especially when they're really getting started. We're very conscious of going to provide, how do I get started? What's the on-ramp is the term. How do I get going? So Kurt directed the team to do something I never could do, which is create a tiered way to approach the critical security controls. I won't bore the details, but we had a group figure out what's the basic set that everyone absolutely should do, no matter how small or under-resourced. That idea has been tremendously well received with school systems, with very small businesses, with lots of places, right? Again, if you try to solve the whole problem, number one, you never will, but you'll be overwhelmed. If you say, let's focus in on a small number of things, then you can make progress. You can have a campaign. You can fund those that need funding. You can help build communities to bring each other up. So the idea is to get started on the right path. The goal is, we're never going to have security as an end state where we're done. Good news, if you go into this business, there's always going to be work to do because criminals and nation-state attackers are not going away. So it's important that you get started in the right path that lets you get going and has a clear evolutionary growth plan that goes with it. That's our goal with this. So again, another example of what we're doing. I won't go through these are things that came up. And then let me finish up with one last thing. So again, part of the message I want to leave with you here. There's lots of great advice in the industry. There's great lists from lots of different sources. What we try to do is provide means to bring you down to the things that are really important, that have the most value that we can do as a community, but also build an ecosystem of support for you. The goal is not to build stone tablets, put on the shelf beautiful documents. The goal is to help you achieve the good intentions. So many of the things I described, this is now, we've produced so many things now, it's no use giving you a list. It's just more confusion. So instead, we focus here on what problems can we help you solve? How do I measure? How do I compare? We have products now, again, free that you can use. How do I know these are effective? Why should I believe your recommendations? That's that community defense model. How do I implement these? Where are the resources? How does this relate to other frameworks? These are the everyday questions of system owners and operators. And so our whole strategy is about helping you get there, right? Answering your questions, not in a generic way, but with specific products that are part of our designed ecosystem. Wherever possible, we work with commercial vendors to get very large scale. But we also recognize that many of you don't have enough budget to go buy really high-end tools or hire multi-million-dollar consultancies. And so we always do our very best to provide a path for what we call the underserved. That is, the market is not interested in you if you're really small. You don't have enough money, right? They'd much rather make a big sale to a big company. And yet you have the same problem. And so what can we do to provide you with free resources, with free information, with access to a self-help community that would allow you to improve? So that's the story I wanted to share with you a little bit. The original title of this, I used to use the title of Making Best Practice Common Practice, based upon the observation of my career, right? I'm seeing all these attacks against the DoD, and they're all based upon conceptually simple problems. Bad passwords, poor configurations, etc. But they're conceptually easy problems to solve. But in real life operations, they can be incredibly hard to solve because you have to get lots of people to cooperate, you have to change lots of minds and change lots of behaviors. So our goal has been to simplify this, bring the most guidance that we can, do it at scale through the vendor community wherever possible, but also make sure we don't leave anybody behind in cybersecurity. So I'll finish up. I'll be glad to take some questions if I haven't scared you away from this. But again, if you're thinking of a career in this kind of work, please, thank you. I want to retire someday, so does Kurt. But it is incredibly important work. And we came down here, again, David, thank you for the invitation. It's kind of a bumper sticker, but it's true. Cybersecurity problems know no boundaries. We are literally in this together, and none of us has the resources or the ability to solve this problem individually. It truly is a place for collective action. So we are highly supportive of the work that's happening down here. We are happy to be both cheerleader and partner, and we're actively spending this visit finding things to do together here in the near future. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions. Thank you.
Invitamos a nuestro moderador Aaron Arbizu, secretario del Consejo Directivo, para que pase al frente y a los asistentes a formular sus preguntas levantando la mano.
Muchas gracias. Si gustan levantar la mano, voy a fungir un poco como traductor para Tony. Si quieren hacer una pregunta en español, se lo voy a traducir. I'll try and translate the questions. Si hay una primera pregunta, de atrás.
Gracias. Thank you very much for your speech. Very interesting. My name is Alfredo Aranguren, CICO from Arca Continental. I have a question. Are you doing any specific work for cybersecurity in OT environments?
Yes, we are, and I'll let Kurt answer that, because you're more current on this.
Yep, so absolutely, we are. We're doing it in two areas. One is we've issued, based on, first thing I would tell you is that in today's environment, IT and OT networks have converged, right? Most organizations, because of resources, they want to be able to manage those OT environments remotely. And so basically, we start with the controls, and then we apply what additional safeguards you need to do for specifically for OT environments. And we look at it from two areas. One's SCADA and also industrial control systems. But for us, it's really about starting first with the critical security controls, because we're looking at how an adversary would actually penetrate that OT environment. And they're going to come in primarily through the IT network. So basically start with the critical security controls, and then apply. We have a companion guide when it comes to operational technology networks, and you apply the additional controls.
Yeah, and those documents are available on our website to download. The controls is kind of the flagship document. A number of others we call companions. How do I interpret the controls for a cloud environment? How do I interpret them for OT environments? So those are, I think, very current too, right? Yeah, so you can just go to our website. They're available at no charge. And then if you have questions, reach out to us. You can talk to some of the authors, no problem. We're a very accessible nonprofit. It's easy to reach the people who worked on these things.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias. ¿Otra pregunta? Okay. Después Arte.
Does this work? Yeah. How do you mentioned that AI will help in problem solving in the cybersecurity area? How do you expect AI to evolve into something that could be useful in this area, as it's taking baby steps right now, but in the near future, how do you see AI helping in this area?
Yeah, it's a very active question, the application of AI. And there's multiple streams of work that we're in. One is, how do we use it to produce our products more effectively for you? And so we have experiments underway around that. This cross-mapping problem, as I mentioned, my son, we hired him. I called him the chief cartographer, the chief map maker of CIS. There is no worse job than cross-mapping between security frameworks, if you've ever tried to do it, because no one uses the same language. Some security frameworks scatter their information across many documents. We try to make ours as very tightly, bounded as possible. That's another area that we've been experimenting with to look at creating cross-mappings. If we could get 60% of the mappings done with technology versus humans, that would be a major step for us. So internally, we're looking at those kinds of problems. We discussed this during dinner. I'd say Kurt and I probably similar views here. That is, so is AI going to destroy our world and we're all going to be answering to Skynet and worrying about Terminators? I don't think so. The bad guys are obviously using it already, but it's sort of an accelerator for things that they were doing. But my experience over decades, and same with Kurt, the life of the defender is really hard. And it's full of tedious, manpower-intensive, manual steps to just deal with the flood of information. And so the opportunity for improvement on the defensive side actually I feel much more optimistic that we could do much better amplifying the power of human beings who spend, if you ever had to deal with incident management things, the correlation of data across multiple sensors, all these sources, is just overwhelming. I mean, anyone who works, we both run big organizations that do incident response. The people that do that for a living are heroes. I mean, it's terrible work. It's tedious. It's full of that. So we think there's great opportunities for streamlining the way defense operates, and we are active in that kind of thing also. Bad guys are good. They've found ways, you probably noticed, improvements in the phishing emails and the spam and that kind of stuff. But for now, we're feeling more optimistic about the defensive opportunities. We're also working with a number of academic institutions, and maybe there are some here in country who are looking at the opportunities for better defense, right? How to better manage, maybe how to take our work and fine tune it for your specific network would be a great area to look into. So we're always looking for who's got new ideas that can take our work and either, make it so much easier to either use or understand or measure against. So yeah, it's an active area for us. I think we'll be back. Kurt's really the decision maker here, but we've been working with Carnegie Mellon and others around academic approaches to the use of AI for defense also.
Thank you, Tony, for your intervention. I have a question, and it's a few thoughts that I've been working out since this morning. That you mentioned a lot about defense, that we are working on defense. And I saw in your last slide the cost of cyber defense. What's your vision or your position? Would there be a time where we can go into cyber offense? I mean, with defense, we are protecting ourselves, but would there be a time that we can be preemptive and we can be like attacking the attacker instead of only defensive position?
Yeah, so I'll offer an opinion, and it's very controversial. A great error. Here's my view. For the vast majority of system owners, attacking is just too many risks. Legally, liability, reputationally, technically. It's just not worth the risk. We could do much more to raise the cost for attackers. In fact, I often say that the term I use is uncertainty. One reason attackers are so successful is there's very little uncertainty because our systems really don't change that much. So if they do reconnaissance, that's good for a long time. The information that's created by their understanding of your network and who's important, who's not, and all the traffic, right? They get a lot of information that's good for a long period of time. Attackers, and Kurt and I lived in a nation-state attack organization, they don't like uncertainty because you have to remember they have a model too. They have a boss, they have a budget, they don't like to take risks, or depending on the culture that is attacking you. Some don't mind taking more risks than others, but the more you understand about the attacker, the more you could manipulate their uncertainty. So we did experiments like this in the DoD. The more you could, if you could rapidly change things within your enterprise, right? Because it's your enterprise, you're running it, you have tools, you actually cause uncertainty for the attacker that forces him to do reconnaissance again. Simple examples that we, like in the DoD, there were things like, if we just restarted the mail servers randomly every once in a while, I know some of you are groaning at that thought because it's complicated, you actually boot certain attackers out. And then you have the opportunity to watch to see who tries to reconnect. When you upgrade your systems, right, you have an opportunity to boot out certain classes of attacks that insert themselves. When attackers don't like uncertainty, they tend to attack you somewhere else that has less uncertainty. So they do more expensive things like attack your supply chain. Where do you get your upgrades from? So you start to see this game play back and forth. So I'm not very, frankly, optimistic or supportive of sort of most of us worrying about direct attack. I could see that we each could do much more to raise the cost of attack knowingly. That's absolutely worth doing, and I think there's plenty of opportunity for that.
Tiempo para una pregunta más.
Yeah, so just like to be a bit clear, both you and Kurt are the pioneers of the CIS controls, in a way.
In a way, it's a complicated origin story, but probably the primary one was the meeting I hosted with 5 friends. Again, I had no idea it was going to be a big thing. So go ahead.
Yeah, because I think you're my cybersecurity idols, and I didn't even know it until right now. Someone that's gonna specialize in hardening and configuration controls. Okay. I'm glad to be here. That's all I'm gonna say.
Well, I'm truly honored. So it was in June of 2001. So I mentioned one of the inspiration points for CIS. I was still at NSA. The blue team at NSA was one of my groups, and they were the producers and keepers of the NSA security guides, which was one of the inspiration points for CIS. And then I led the campaign, which probably got me more attention than anything I've ever done, to release it to the public in June of 2001. And I did that, and you can still find that, there's a whole story, but it was driven by a belief. We didn't do it just because we're nice people. I like to think I'm a nice person, but we did it because we recognized this idea of what we were seeing in the late 90s. The Defense Department was outsourcing lots of work to commercial partners, transportation, uniforms, paying people, right? That was kind of the trend. And this, you go to war with your partners, right? It's not the US, it's the US and this coalition in the Middle East, fighting Iraq. So boundaries were disappearing. So if you were gonna use commercial suppliers, for example, to move your troops and your uniforms and goods, you need them to have some security. So the idea was, if we release this, we will both provide the opportunity to improve the security of what was really the DoD's supply chain. But I was also trying to make a message from NSA. What I was trying to say, NSA again, was a closed society, very secretive. I was trying to send a message. We are part of the community. And remember, you're too young for the early days of open source, but the idea was, if you want to be a leader in the community, you have to bring content. You can't just show up and say, we're NSA, come work with us. No one will do that. So we put it out in the public as a message of goodwill. We're going to give you exactly the same information we give to the US government. And that, I had a very progressive boss who agreed to do that. So if I did one thing right in my career, that might have been it. And it opened the door for partnership with CIS. Neither Kurt nor I ever expected we'd be winding up at CIS for our next career, but it's perfect. But yes, thank you. So you're very kind, I appreciate that. But it's a lot of good people. And I never wrote a single recommendation in the NSA security guide. It was the work of just amazing people that were in our groups. I mean, people that I was honored to work with, to be the manager, et cetera. And I was just a cheerleader and the flag carrier for the cause. But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, very down to earth, very pragmatic. Thank you very much.
We're very simple. We're very simple.
Vamos por una última pregunta.
Hello. If people need a change of mind of cybersecurity topics, how can we help to contribute in that? Of course, in the right and easy way.
For you to contribute?
Yeah.
So the way, again, we operate as a volunteer activity. So we bring volunteers into, for specific projects and sort of have a pool of volunteers. For example, the work that David is trying to do here with Consejo C. This is incredibly important, right? We're not saying this to be nice, we're saying this because it's true. It's part of I don't understand the culture here, but in our world, there are great people who really care about the security of the internet, who have great talent. But left to their own devices, security people tend to spend a lot of time complaining. Oh my God, we told them, we fixed that password problem, why didn't they listen to us? So find a nonprofit that is constructive, right? That is creating things, not a place for people to go gripe about what's wrong. But how do I take that information and create and share products and services that can have large appeal? And think of it in that way. So we have no CIS business model without volunteers, period. And so, but there are plenty of opportunities for that. So, take that, your smarts, your energy, and find a place to channel it. I mean, and technology is full of this, full of great people who want to contribute. You just need to provide them a means to do so. So that's, again, another reason why we're down here with David, because you're still fairly early in this journey. And we have already identified things that we could be doing together, including the identification and management of volunteers. So again, I think there's no shortage of great talent. We just need to find ways to get organized around the best ideas. And then, the sky is the limit. We will continue to work on things like recognizing the importance of nonprofits. Kurt and I, again, we have 90 years or so in you know, we had a long careers in government, 70 or so in government, right? But as nonprofits, I mean, we are cheerleaders, flag carriers for the nonprofit community. There's incredible power in volunteerism. And we see it every day. I'm one of the co-founders of nonprofit Cyber, that I think David mentioned in the, because I just think it's so important. And it's even more important today when society is fragmented. Right? People can't agree on anything. Half the people don't trust the government at all. We need new models to bring people together. Nonprofits are places where people have already agreed to work together across boundaries, across sectors, you know, across the different roles that they play. Well, then let's use their work, right? We can create tremendous good in a much more flexible way by doing it. So I'm sorry for the long story, but you know, thank you for asking. I think David is creating, you know, I hope you're celebrating 20 years from now, your birthday, and I hope I'm still around to come celebrate with you. But we are just big believers that finding nonprofits is a great opportunity. And many folks who volunteer for us have great day jobs or their experience with us. One of the things we're going to do is try to organize our volunteers better. If you're a successful volunteer, we want to celebrate you. We want to give you credentials. We want employers to know and value that you see yourself as part of something bigger. I mean, when I'm hiring people, that's who I wanted. Technically skilled, but people that really care about this job. And so I think that's a great opportunity for you. So David, I hope you're prepared for all the volunteers that you will get, right? And so with that, that's great. All right, thank you all very much. We're honored to be part of it.